This is Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell, all talk and all crime. The former warden of the most secure prison in the United States, full of the most violent criminals, terrorists, drug lords inside the Supermax, and the mother of the criminal mastermind behind the Silk Road, the Amazon of black market drug sales on the dark web. Was her son, Ross Ulbricht's life sentence too harsh? Does he need to be in a maximum security prison surrounded by society's most violent? The warden and the prisoner's viewpoints on the number of subjects tonight. Tonight on Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell, Robert Hood is a nationally recognized correctional professional with over 40 years in local, state, federal criminal justice. He retired from the Federal Bureau of Prisons as warden of the nation's most secure institution, known as the Supermax Penitentiary in Florence, Colorado. In his role as a warden, he communicated daily with inmates such as Terry Nichols, the Oklahoma City bomber, Richard Reed, the Al-Qaeda shoe bomber, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. We've done a show on that. Ramzi Yousef, the mastermind behind the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, FBI agent turned Russian spy, Robert Hansen, and others. Lynn Ulbricht is Ross Ulbricht's mother. She runs the freeross.org website devoted to the appeals process for the convicted Silk Road mastermind. She's interested in criminal justice, fairness, and reform. She's been a guest on our show. Welcome, Lynn and Bob.
Thank you.
We're excited to learn about the little-known Supermax and also about Lynn, who's uprooted her life completely and moved to Colorado, where Ross is in another similar type penitentiary in the same town of Florence as the Supermax. Bob, give us the overview on what is the Alcatraz of the Rockies as it's known.
The Supermax is one of 4 facilities. They're in a complex called the Federal Correctional Complex. There's 2,811 inmates there today. Turns out to be a small camp. There's a 500-man camp. There's a federal correctional institution, pretty much a low to medium security type of open facility. And then there's the USP Penitentiary, United States Penitentiary, with around 900 inmates, and then the Supermax. The Supermax only can hold 490 inmates, and we never hit that mark. Today, there's 411 inmates. And the reason why I say that is out of the 183,852 federal inmates that we have today, you really do have to earn your way to the Supermax. It's hard to get in, and it's impossible to get out of.
How is it escape-proof?
Escape-proof by design. There's 6 gun towers at that facility. It's adjacent to the United States Penitentiary, which has another 6 towers. So there's really 12 towers, manned 24 hours. There's mobile patrols. There's high-tech security cameras all over the place, hundreds of them inside the Supermax itself. And it's just the concentration of staff versus inmates that you can't afford to do in most prisons. So what we have done through the years, there's only been 3 Supermax prisons in history. And that's the Alcatraz facility, of course, we're all aware of. And after about 30 years, that was discontinued as a federal Supermax. And then Marion, Illinois replaced that, and finally the Supermax was built in 1994 in Colorado. And it truly is the most secure prison in this country.
All right, you got some really bad dudes who hang out there. Tell us, we'll go through some of them. Tell us about the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski.
Yeah, Ted Kaczynski doing 8 life sentences, I believe it is now. So, I mean, I say that not jokingly, just when you look at it. He's serving 8 life sentences, known as a Unabomber, and he pled guilty back in 98 to building and transporting and mailing explosives. So he carried out several bombings. I think it was 16 bombings. But his main thing was pushing against technology. It was almost like the Frankenstein movie, where it's an interesting movie, but if you really know the guts of it, why it was even designed, a book by Shelley, it's all against technology. So even though he had a good idea, because technology is kind of hurting us a little bit lately, I think what has happened, his manifesto, he went so far as to say, well, let me kill some people so I can, push my message. Today, he's sitting, as we speak, it's 6 o'clock where I am, on p.m., and he's sitting in a cell for the next 23 hours, again, for the rest of his life, 23 hours a day in this 7 by 12-foot cell.
Wow.
It's so secure that it was designed intentionally so the inmates could not see the beauty of the Rocky Mountains. It is truly as I mentioned on one of the national TV shows, it is a clean version of hell. It truly is a terrible, terrible place.
How is he doing, or...
Well, I've retired, but I can tell you this. Take anyone and put them in a box that's 7 by 12. And I think the hard part, answer your question, it depends on what you're coming in as. He's not coming in as a streetwise guy who's been in prison all his life and, a tough guy. He's, a doctorate degree, worked in Berkeley. He's, PhD in many languages. So most of his day is spent, like I said, in the cell reading various languages on books that we provide. All the services are brought to his cell. He's never allowed out except for recreation. And then when he is allowed out, I do recall that he has a high interest in running. And so do I. I used to do marathon running. So that was our common discussion. He'll run around in a circle in a caged area. We normally don't like to call it a cage, but that's what it is. It's a cage. And he would be there by himself, running in circles until his hour is up, and he'd go back into his cell. So it's when you're getting 8 life sentences, you're certainly not thinking about too much about treatment, about reentry into society, all the things that most inmates think of.
Now, what about one of these terrorists, Ramzi Youssef, Richard Reed, even the Olympic bomber in Atlanta? Take one that you want to talk about.
Well, the most obvious one, they're all interesting and for a different reason, but Ramzi Youssef, as an example, he's serving a life sentence plus 240 years. So even if he gets past the life, he has 240 on top of that. He was convicted in 1994 for terrorism, all related to the 93 World Trade bombing. And if you recall, that's where 6 people were killed and injured more than 1,000 people. So when you look at his kind of a background and the following, he has a lot of people that have an interest in him. He is placed or was placed in not secret, but a prison within the prison within the prison, and he was there for quite some time since his sentencing. And he was provided what we call our SAMs, Special Administrative Measures. And this is law. It's not the warden designing this, by the way. It's the law that when he was placed in the Supermax, he was not to communicate with any other person, meaning inmate. So, of course, staff interact. But he's placed in a cell away from other inmates with no ability to communicate. Newspapers that come in, if you're even allowed, it's a prescription that each inmate has that's separate, each having this sanction, if you will. So he might get a newspaper, but it's 30 days late. It might be redacted, might be cut up to the point that he can't read, certain segments. And he certainly wouldn't get any contemporary TV. He would not be listening to your live show. He would not be watching CNN Tonight. Again, it's part of it is to cut off the head of the snake. He's did a terrible act. He's there for the rest of his life. And to be candid with you, he's just one of many inmates like that. And what makes him different as a terrorist, because we have several terrorists there, there's a big difference of having a person like that or Richard Reed, who is more of a follower. Youssef is a leader. Reed, serving 3 life sentences plus 110 years, is truly a guy that couldn't figure out how to blow up a plane, which actually is not as hard as you think.
What stops these guys from just mentally breaking down? I mean, this lifestyle seems like torture.
Yes, good point. I think the ones that have been in numerous prisons and we simply can't hold them. Like I said, over 183,000, almost 184,000 federal inmates. Those that have been around, they've been to our camps, the low securities, the medium securities, the penitentiaries, and finally it's like the world becomes smaller. The boxes of life become smaller, and they end up in a place like the Supermax. They somehow adjust. They simply adjust. The ones that I personally, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not trying to go in that direction. But I can tell you from my years of being a warden of 4 different prisons and been around a little bit, I don't know how they do it. I guess that's my answer. But the other part is those that are not streetwise have more problems because, like Robert Hansen, been all over the world. He was a super spy and a super FBI guy and all that. It must be harder for a guy like that who has 3 life sentences to sit in a cell when you've had it all. If you didn't have diddly squat, in some cases, you're more able to adjust because you were living under a bridge and doing some heavy-duty drugs and then end up getting involved in some other criminal activity.
All right, I'm going to switch now. We've just been talking about the conditions of these guys. Lynn, Ross, your son is in USP there, which is on the same property and also a pretty scary place. What does his conditions look like, and what's a day like in his life?
Well, first, I just want to say that I know the media has called Ross a criminal mastermind, but that's a bit hyperbolic. And I would just like to put that in context. Ross admits to creating the Silk Road and running it for a time, but he was in his mid-20s. He's a geek. He was a geeky libertarian who worked for the Ron Paul campaign and very idealistic. I'm not saying it wasn't reckless. I'm not saying he didn't make mistakes, and I'm not defending Silk Road or drug use at all. But I just want to say that he's not a criminal mastermind. The idea behind it, from what he's told me and said, is that it was to create a open market, a free market that protected the privacy of its users, and it was vendors and buyers who determined what was bought and sold. It was product agnostic, except that it did have exceptions because Ross is a firm believer in voluntary interaction, do no harm, not using force. So, for instance, things like child pornography was forbidden. Violent services like assassinations were forbidden. Stolen property was forbidden because these are things that hurt people. So I just want to put it in context, especially after discussing the Supermax, that Ross is not someone that is dangerous. He had no violent priors at all or criminal record at all. And none of his convictions were violent. And in fact, his designation, each inmate gets a designation score, and even including his charges, which add points, Ross is a designation level of 12, which Bob knows is very low. It actually, what I was told, puts him one step up from a camp in a low-security prison. And so here he is in this USP, and it's because of his sentence. And in fact, when he was admitted to the USP, they said, "What are you doing in here?" And then they went, "Oh, the sentence, that's why." And since then, I personally and his lawyer and Ross himself have had people who work at the prison say, "He doesn't belong in here. This isn't right. He doesn't belong in here. He's a normal, peaceful, very sweet person." And as Bob said, it's hard. Nothing in his life has prepared him to live among violent people. Now, Ross does get along with people, and he actually is doing okay, but there are definitely challenges.
Is his safety at risk, Lynn?
Well, I think in that environment, his safety is at risk. He has not been personally threatened or anything, but things happen in there. Violence happens in there, and things can set off riots. Bob can tell you, I'm sure, that it is a dangerous environment with people with weapons sometimes and attack people and that sort of thing. Ross pretty much keeps to himself. He's certainly not, in a gang or anything like that. He when they're not on lockdown, which has been happening quite frequently lately, he gets to go outside, which he's very happy about. And it does make a difference. Bob mentioned about not being able to see the mountains.
Right.
When he was in New York for 3.5 years, where, again, he was a model prisoner, he led classes, he helped people get their GED, all kinds of stuff. He's just been nothing but easy and peaceful. He couldn't go outside except on a roof in Manhattan for an hour or two a week. And so for him to come to Colorado, where they have a big yard and he can run and he can work out and just see the sunrise, has made a big difference in his state of mind. He spends a lot of time in the law library because he's been working on his case. He and his legal team have filed a petition with the Supreme Court earlier this month. And so he was quite involved in that and still is involved with his legal defense. And so he does a lot of that. And, of course, there's, when they're locked down, they're in their cell.
Is he in one of these small cells by himself that Bob was describing in Supermax, or how does he arrange it?
Oh, no. Well, no, it's not. Thank God he's not in Supermax. My God, he's in a cell with a cellmate, and it's small, but it's not. He's not. Well, except when they're in lockdown, which is I don't really understand lockdowns, real extended lockdowns, because it seems like the people who caused the fight or whatever it was over are gone. And everybody else gets punished. I just don't understand it.
What's his cellmate in for?
I think something nonviolent. He's getting out in a little over a year. And in fact, they arranged for him to have Ross as a cellmate because he was he was terrified, and they knew Ross was peaceful and fine, and they didn't want to put him, it seemed like, with someone who was more potentially, difficult.
All right, Bob, let me ask Bob now. Ross has his, no prior record and not a history of violence, although we can talk about some of the details. He wasn't charged with, for instance, putting hits on people, but that he did think that had happened. But and he's sentenced to a life sentence without parole. He's in one of the most violent prisons in the country. Does he belong there, and how would he get out of there?
Again, I don't know all the facts. The judge obviously sentenced him there, but there's a place in Texas called the Designation Sentencing Computation Center, and that's where all federal inmates, what happens is when the judge says, hey, guess what, you're going away for whatever time, it is not the judge. A lot of people think that. It's not the judge saying you're going to a specific institution. They might say it, but the point is it's only a recommendation. It's solely the responsibility of the Bureau of Prisons to designate the inmate. So having said that, they'll look at security level. They'll look at everything about the person, and even with the numbers, as Lynn mentioned, fairly short numbers, they'll look at things like I hate to say it this way, but out of 122 prisons, they'll look at that and say, well, which one do we need more inmates? And ideally, the manual will say you should be going within 500 miles of your home. So if you take his existing home, his original home, he's not even close. And so you sit there and you say, okay, that's out of line.
Okay.
Should he be there? Again, I don't know all the facts, but I can say this. He is clearly, without question, from what I do know about him, a minority within that setting. That is a serious prison. It's not the Supermax. It's one click away.
Right.
And each prison has their own reputation. The United States Penitentiary in Florence is in lockdown a lot, historically. There's some people that have been to the Supermax and have slid over, if you will. They kind of graduated, and trust me, they're kissing the ground just to be out of their cells by being at the penitentiary next door. And it works in reverse. But I think, in fairness to Lynn, again, as a family member, we might look at this, Lynn might look at this a little different than myself, or as a victim or whatever. We all have different thoughts on this, but I can tell you this. Being 500 miles away from his home setting is outside the guidelines to begin with. There's 879 inmates at the facility. It's not necessarily overcrowded, but I can tell you this. System-wide, the Bureau of Prison is at 14%. Okay, 14%. At the high securities, the penitentiaries, they're at 25% right now. So they're overcrowded. And I think the ramifications, and again, I say this respectfully for Lynn because I'm speaking to a family member of someone, so I'm not trying to scare you or anything. But the reality is, he's a young guy, no criminal background. So he is a fluke. He is a fluke in that setting. Normally
and high profile.
And look at that. And then some people say, oh, come on now, there's school there, there's religious services, he can get out, he can recreate, he can see the Rocky Mountains. That's true, but I'm telling you, thank goodness he has a good roommate. I can think of an example, and let me just give one quick example. Back in 1999, a guy by the name of William Sablon, he and his cousin, I believe it was, Rudy Sablon, they were two inmates in the same cell, which I don't allow. I don't allow family members to be in the same cell. But to my understanding, he was in the same cell. They were overpopulated. They brought a third guy in, and the third, so three to a cell, which is terrible. But they put him in there, and the guy was kind of a smart mouth, and somehow the guy said, hey, if you don't act right, me and my buddy here, my cousin, whatever, we're going to do what we have to do. And the guy said, hey, you don't have the nerve. You don't have the guts. Well, that evening, this is in 1999, William Sablon disemboweled that inmate. And he said, you don't think I have the guts? He took the innards of that inmate out at the USP, right at that particular prison. He gutted the person out, and when staff were looking through the windows to take count, they realized blood was all over, and both William and his cousin Rudy were sitting there as if nothing happened. Again, an isolated example, but let me tell you, we have serious gang members at that prison. We have serious guys who have done unbelievable physical activities. So I don't want to make it sound like, he might be walking around looking out, playing baseball tonight. Maybe he's at the movies tonight. They do a lot of neat things. But it's still one click away from the Supermax. You're
listening to Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. We're going to do more on this subject as soon as we get back. So stay with us. And we're back on Forensic Talk here with Lynn Ulbricht, the mother of Ross Ulbricht. and Bob Hood, former warden at Supermax. Now, you've just been going through this, and this prison gun, it seems like a complete mismatch for Ross Ulbricht. But continue where this thought was leading to. Are you going to say he should not be there? And B, how would he be gotten out of there to where he should be?
Well, again, from what I do know, I guess I would look at, you can fight the sentence, you can go after the courts, you can go back and forth, spend a lot of money, and if you prevail, you prevail.
Mm-hmm.
If that was my family member,
yes,
I would, the short-term goal I would have is simply on redesignation. He needs to get out of the USP because, an example like I told you, known as one of the tougher penitentiaries in the country as a federal prison, I would look at the facts. The facts that what is the count? It's 879 today. It's overpopulated. The remote location of it. It's remote in the the Rocky Mountains here. The fact that other inmates are at the medium security levels, lower security. They are truly enjoying college classes. They're doing a lot of neat computer class. They're doing all kinds of neat things at the lower levels. The higher the level, the less activities you have.
How do you get redesignation?
Well, again, it's not the court necessarily. I mean, unless they change the sentence and drop charges. Mm-hmm. It goes through a place called Grand Prairie, Texas. It's a designation and sentencing computation center.
Okay.
And everyone in the bureau is going to tell you, from the director on down, it has to be the inmate requesting it from inside through his case manager. You have to work your way through the system.
Okay.
But clearly, it's redesignating it. And again, I'm not saying just someone like me, but if you know the system, you realize there's people today, top of my head, Jeffrey McDonald, did that ring a bell?
Yes.
Former Green Beret, allegedly killed his wife. And
is he in that prison? Is he in that prison?
He's not at that prison, but he was at my when I was in Oregon, the Federal Correctional Institution, which is like a country club.
Okay.
He was there walking around. So my point is,
wow,
you can have a guy like that at a lower security where, in this case,
Ross is nowhere near. This guy was that guy was guilty too, wasn't he?
Which one?
But Jeffrey McDonald.
Well, guilty in the sense that he was
convicted. He was convicted, but I think he really is guilty. I mean, he's always claimed he's innocent, but
I never know. He's losing appeals. He's fighting whatever over the years. Yeah. But as a warden of an institution where he walked around every day and whatever, his was a serious helter-skelter type of crime. He blamed it on hippies, if you will.
Exactly.
And so that's my point. There's people in lower security that
are a lot worse in terms of violence. Is Ross working his way through the case manager and up like Bob was describing?
Well, I guess at a certain point they get evaluated, and I guess there's a 6-month evaluation. Mm-hmm. But he was told by someone that it would take 7 years to be moved to a medium. And I don't know. I mean, just even though he did 3.5 in New York with no problem, and now he's been there 6 months. So hopefully, I think some of that New York time does apply.
Was that New York when he was that was in the city, right? Was that a medium?
Yeah.
Well, no, it's administrative. It's a detention center. Basically, you're there back and forth to court. So
is that Rikers Island or
no? That's a city jail.
Okay.
The Metropolitan Correctional Center. It's right in the heart of the city. But again, you're going there back and forth. The actual designation and sentencing, that's what occurred after the 3 years he was up there, back and forth, fighting in the courts.
Yes.
Now that they said, read my lips, you have been sentenced to X amount, he's only really has done 6 months at the USP. So his chances, or any inmate's chances of leaving after 6 months just getting there is next to impossible. But you have
Bob,
to start.
Actually, that's not accurate because Ross was sentenced in 2015, but he asked for special permission to stay in New York so that he could work on his appeal with the lawyers. So he actually had been sentenced already, and it was an exception. So it's a little bit different. I mean, I know what you're saying is normal. So they actually, I believe, will apply the 2 years after he was sentenced, even though he wasn't in Florence. But in any case... you're 100% right. That'll apply. All that applies. He gets his credit time served right from day one. However, his time sitting at the USP in Florence starts the day he walks in there. They normally don't put you there and say, oh, guess what? We have a change of plans now. We're going to move you. It's very rare to move an inmate
within a 1 year period of
so
getting
you're
there.
kind of talking. You're talking the real world, in other words.
Right. Well, let me ask you, Bob. Can I ask Bob a question?
Sure.
Do you recommend hiring advocates that will go and talk to people at the prison for you? Because I know that's a whole little industry, and I didn't know if it was a waste of money or if it could be possibly useful. Do you know?
I think, I know them because a lot of them retired from the system and, whatever. Generally speaking, many are doing it for the money. They're not doing it for the right reason, in my opinion. I think to have someone look over your paperwork, see how you're doing is one thing. But the fact that they're knocking on the door and saying, guess what, I'm representing someone, I don't believe the advocates are actually helping you as much as you would think.
A lot of them claim to. They do. I know people, and I can, they do that. So,
Yeah, it's probably.
Okay, thanks.
Bob, give it the sentence, the life sentence without parole, and on the one hand, and on the other, you've described all these factors that Ross doesn't really match up against. Is it sort of that he's out of luck, or they need to make him sit there for X number of years? Does his good behavior matter?
Well, and you get times good behavior and all that, but when you're looking at a life sentence, the guy's doing 5 years is excited if they give him 50 days off a year because he's going to school, he's taking care of business, and he's not having incident reports to get him locked up into the prison of the prison.
Uh-huh.
But today, as we speak, there's 4,736 guys doing life in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So when you think about it, 2.7% of the whole population are these lifers. And don't get me wrong, if you really analyze that statistic, you're talking about heavy-duty gangbangers, heavy-duty, the guys that you would recognize their names and say, gosh, I think all of us would agree they need to be secured somewhere because of their unbelievable crimes.
Uh-huh.
In this case, what just stands out is the backgrounds, almost like a pre-sentence report. Where did they come from? And I am surprised with the background of Lynn's son Ross has. Can he be handled in a lower security? Back to your initial question. Sure, the answer is yes. And I'm saying that as a former warden of many years of many institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know all the case. I just know that there's no history. And don't get me wrong, I don't know all the facts I know what he was sentenced for. I know what some allegations were related to him that weren't sustained. Pretty serious. Some of them are not deserving a camp. But can you walk around in the same prison? It's in Maryland now. He was transferred as someone like McDonald. Could he walk around the same institution that's medium, that is open almost all day long, and you can move around and it's non-threatening? The answer, in my opinion, is yes.
Lynn, do you think he's a political prisoner?
Well, that's a whole other discussion. I would say because the biggest drug seller on Silk Road got 10 years. The biggest heroin and cocaine seller got 5, and it goes down from there. The guy who was running the next Silk Road and Silk Road 2, which the government themselves in the criminal complaint called equivalent, he's free. He never did time.
Wow.
I think that there's other factors. My personal belief is that it's about Bitcoin because Chuck Schumer was behind the whole thing, and he was on the Senate Finance Committee, and I think that it got their attention, this cryptocurrency that was out of government control. That's my personal opinion. And I think it was about the Internet, and using Tor, which is a whole other, it's anonymous. I don't really think it's very atypical for a first-time offender to get this kind of sentence for drug crimes, and to call him a kingpin because they say he ran this website the whole time. Yeah. Running a website is not Pablo Escobar or El Chapo. I'm sorry. And there's no violence involved. No victim came forward at trial to say Ross had harmed them. So I know this isn't the Bureau of Prisons. Well, they could waive this sentencing thing. They could put him in a medium if they wanted, but it's really the judge. She has condemned him to be in this violent environment, which is so inappropriate and really threatening and dangerous for him. And, and so is he a political prisoner? I think there's a lot of politics involved, yes.
All right, let me ask.
They wanted an example, and they got their example. Didn't do any good. It didn't detract. It didn't stop darknet markets. In fact, they're flourishing, bigger and badder than they were.
And bitcoins are helping. Yeah, bitcoins are making.
Yeah.
Now, so let me ask you this, Lynn. Now, he went in with the best of intentions, libertarianism and everything. Now he is where he is now. Is he contrite? How does he feel? What level of responsibility and contrition does he feel right now himself?
Oh, well, of course he regrets doing that. He would never do it again. That's the other thing about this life sentence, and a lot of life sentences. And there's a lot of nonviolent people serving life in our system, and I really think it's wrong. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, you didn't get life unless you were a mass murderer. And we've been describing some bad guys, but there's also people in there who are not violent, who've served a lot of time already. But in any case, no, I mean, look, he was a zealot, mid-20s guy, on fire for freedom and all of that. Mm-hmm. And, we know young men in their 20s do reckless things, but they mature. And Ross has matured a lot through this whole experience. And to say that in 20 years, which was the mandatory minimum she could have given him, 20 years, which is a generation, it's long, that he would come out after not being on the Internet, because he's not allowed email like all the other prisoners, or Internet either. I guess none of them have that, because it's an Internet crime. He can't even email us like other prisoners can do with their families. That he'd get out in 20 years and start another Silk Road is absurd. It's absurd. And yet she thought fit to give him the short of a death sentence, or short of the Supermax, which is kind of really a death sentence in its own way. Mm-hmm. This is a walking death sentence. It is. It just takes longer, as Ross said. It is. It just takes longer.
It's a walking death sentence. And also, and Bob, you maybe have insight on this, he has a life sentence without parole. What are the odds on appeal? Very low?
Extremely low, yes.
Extremely low. So we have a guy that's in the wrong place, and if he plays it to the system on the appeal side, he has very, very small chance. Lynn, how do you keep his and your morale up?
Well, I can't let him die in there. I can't. It's just so wrong. Mm-hmm. And so I just take it day by day. I have faith that justice will be served, and Ross is intentionally positive. He's really inspiring me because he stays positive. He tries to be a good person in there. He's just really quite incredible with his attitude and not letting it eat him alive.
He's not bitter?
He really isn't. He will not say anything against the judge. Amazing. He won't say anything against anyone. He's like, look, we just need, I believe this is going to work out, and we're just going to do our best and keep going, which is pretty amazing. He's just very, I don't know, he's an amazing guy who's really being wasted. And it's so unnecessary and expensive, by the way, to the taxpayer to keep someone like him in this situation, or and many people. He's not the only one.
Bob, let me ask you a question on that. It clearly, if you listen, it sounds like he was sentenced to send a message, and it may have been Senator Schumer or whatever. Is that acceptable? Is that fair? Is that considered an illegitimate way to sentence somebody?
Well, again, if you look at the purpose for prisons, some of it is rehabilitation, some of it's retribution, some of it's, pure punishment, etc. You can look at all reasons. But clearly, when you look at this, does it appear like the sentence and the location, the combination is what jumps out. And eventually the location will change. You won't stay in the penitentiary forever based on good behavior and some other things. But I think when you have a federal judge recommending such a large sentence and trying to make an example out of him. Yeah. The Bureau of Prison is, even though it's only a judicial recommendation, they can say no thanks, and we're going to put him in this medium security camp or prison like others. But they hate to say it's politics, but yes, there's someone sending a message for others. You look at the example, though. I think someone like Hansen, the FBI spy, who's doing 3 life sentences. Do I really think he's going to jump on someone? He's going to rape an inmate? He's going to try to escape? The answer is no. He is at the Supermax purely for deterrent for other people working in the field, so we don't have additional spies. So this appears to be a super duper punishment and also a deterrence for others.
Yeah, now Robert Hansen...
Can I ask something real quick? The judge herself actually said she was okay with him being in a medium. And so does that help him get in a medium sooner? I know it's just a recommendation, but she did say it. And she left it up to the Bureau.
Yeah, the Bureau, I think what happened, again, we're all speculating here, but there's things that jump out in my mind from what I do know. For example, since he's so new to the system, and you might not think so, but really, in comparison to others,
4 years,
he's just starting out. I think my guess would be not just the sentence from the judge, which was clearly to send a message. When you look at someone who had unbelievable amounts of money, and maybe not now, but I'm just saying, at one point his net worth was like $28 million or something like that. When you look at anyone who has money that's in prison, not only do you have to be careful of potential escape. If I was his age and I was in a prison setting with the time that he has, I'm the former warden of a prison. My life would be thinking about how to get out legally, but also I'd be thinking about escape. At that age, I would, I'm telling you. Because
how would you possibly escape? It's like 3 levels of razor wire everywhere. And
no, I think he's saying if he was in a lower security, though.
That as well. I'm saying both, actually. But I think when you look at someone having an unbelievable amount of money, and then you think about computer and the support, there's a large support system out there. A lot of people believe in your son, and that's good, whether it be friends or whatever. But when the government looks at that and says, okay, money, connections outside, the average person is not just going to dream about freedom. They might want to act on that freedom. And then there's another part that people don't like to discuss. You don't hear it on too many shows anyway. His own protection. The fact that he's there, it's interesting that he's still walking the compound, because as other inmates realize his background, etc., he becomes, there's no other way to say it, he becomes a target.
You're listening to Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. We'll talk a little prison reform, and we'll finish up in our final segment. From Philly to Fresno, Brooklyn to Boston, Data Cable Superstars has the best prices on installation of Cat 5 and Cat 6 wiring for cameras, computers, phone, and data, specializing in off-peak installs as to not interrupt your workflow. If this is an I need it done yesterday situation, then it's time to call Data Cable Superstars at 203-942-1427 or go to datacablesuperstars.com. That's Data Cable Superstars, all one word, .com. Data Cable Superstars, where estimates and big ideas are always free. And we're back. Bob Hood, warden of Supermax at one time, and Lynn Ulbricht, the mother of Ross Ulbricht of the Silk Road incident. So Bob says that basically Ross is going to get out of that level of prison almost no matter what. I guess it's a matter of time.
Years.
It's a matter of years still. Lynn, what's the status of his appeals? Do you have any thoughts that you want to throw at Bob as to how to make this process go quicker for this guy that's been over-sentenced, basically?
The appeals, like I said, it's been filed, a cert petition's been filed to the Supreme Court challenging the sentence and challenging some of the investigative techniques. And so that's happening. So it's getting the attention of law experts. I hope that it will bring some relief. I don't know. I mean, Ross has a friend in there who has got a life sentence for selling marijuana 15 years ago. He's already done 15 years.
Wow.
He's got life, no violence. And ironically, the federal prisons in Colorado, I know there's very violent people that society needs to be protected from, but there's also people who are getting very excessive sentencing that it seems really un-American to me. And without any second chance, without parole, which was taken away in the 80s, so no chance of parole for good behavior even after a long time, no conjugal visits. So families are so hurt by this. And, this is not the, a warden's fault. This is the system with these sentences. They're just seem so excessive to me.
How are you doing yourself? You've uprooted your entire life to move to Colorado from New York, right?
Well, we moved from Texas to the East Coast first.
But he was in detention.
I've got this nomadic lifestyle. Yeah, it's rough. I won't deny that. But I believe in Ross. I love him, and I feel like it's super important for him to have visits. I I don't want that to be his only world.
How often how often can you visit?
Well, now that he's in a regular penitentiary, 3 days a week, unless he's on lockdown and they stop visits. Sometimes they allow visits during the lockdown. But, so it's a good amount. I'm going to see him tomorrow.
Bob, you've heard just this last bit. What fundamental, quick, big reform should be happening in the mass incarceration industry?
Well, first of all, we as a country, we need to stop bragging in some cases that we incarcerate more people than anywhere in the world.
Yes.
We criticize other countries, but we are the number one.
Yes.
Number two is about 60% of all the inmates, especially federal, are in for drug-related offenses.
That's right.
Drug-related offenses, and we're just destroying them by putting them in for such a long period of time.
And by the way, let me make a point.
Thank you. I absolutely second that.
Let me make a point there too, Bob. Is addiction and mental health problems are not a good fit for being solved in prison, are they, to begin with?
Correct. If you have a mental illness, your ability to follow directions, your ability to be in a confined area are contradictory to what you need.
Yeah, and a lot of these people there, even some of the violent ones, it's related to addiction, drug problems, and mental health.
Exactly. So when you think about that, and I think especially for your listeners, 95%, in my experience of almost 40 years of prison work, most people in prison, and you might disagree with this, Jim, because you're not in the prison business, but most people in prison are really good people. They truly are good people.
That's what Ross tells me, too.
And 95% are coming home. They're going to be your neighbors. So we need to prepare them. Now, granted, the ones that aren't coming home, that's the weird part. If they're at the Supermax, they blew up the World Trade Center, they think they have done some great deed, that's a whole different story. We're not trying to rehabilitate Ramzi Youssef. Let's be candid there. But I think when you look at the experience, the level of education, you look at the potential of how we can utilize 2.4 million people that are incarcerated in this country.
Prison reentry. We've been doing shows on that, exactly.
Yeah.
Job training,
housing.
One
just recently. Yeah, I just heard on your show.
It is,
I think, and sometimes it's, we give them the vocational training, we give them the academic training, and then something as simple as I've been advocating for the last year or so, it's like a missing key to the reentry thing for some inmates, not all. If you have the KKK on your forehead, or you have your prison number on your cheek, or the teardrop, which symbolizes how many people you killed, but all of a sudden you grew up in prison, you did your 15 years, your time to come home, and you want to be back with your family, tattoo removal, trust me, is something that if most of these guys would ever take off some of these ugly tattoos, maybe not Ross, but as far as the average
he doesn't have any. But he's one of the few.
That's a nice step. That's a nice step.
I think
some of the
really
reforms come down to our system. We need to stop thinking that by putting people in for more time for drug-related offenses, putting people in that are nonviolent into environments that are historically known. Where Ross is historically known for lockdowns, violence, heavy-duty gang issues. Again, I know he's just one of many, but today there's almost 23,000 inmates that are affiliated with gangs.
Wow.
They're not just wannabes. They're in the gang, 23,000 out of less than 200,000 inmates. So there's a lot of activity going on with introduction of contraband, weapons, and this and that. I think we need to do a better job of classifying our inmates, even if they're doing a long time. In Ross's case, he never changes the time frame. You have to work on one thing at a time. But does he need to be in an environment that's designed to incarcerate some heavy-duty people? And my last point, because I know I have to go, is you get some people like Michael Swango years ago, Dr. Swango, they call him Dr. Death. He was at that prison. He was at the USP. He was walking around, a former doctor, Marine, family man, and then they were aware of the fact that he was a prestigious doctor, and he was, he got 3 life sentences, I believe it was, for killing patients. But the point of it is, here's a medical doctor walking around, a white guy who's never been in prison, and all of a sudden, someone walk up to him, cut his neck, and to this day, to my knowledge, he is now at the Supermax, has been at the Supermax. He was one of my inmates, and he will never come out of his cell.
Why is he in the Supermax?
His own protection. You can't put him in a penitentiary.
For his own protection. So he's tortured, basically, for his own protection.
Well, I'm just saying, he was at the USP. Life was good, walking around.
He was going to get killed, Well, I'll tell you.
Why wouldn't they put them at one of the places that they put child molesters? Aren't there those places that USPs that are considered more safe?
Oh, yeah,
for people who are targets?
There's a place right in Colorado, very close to where your son is. It's in Englewood or Littleton, Colorado. It's primarily known for having drug and mostly sex offenders. It's a lower security, obviously, but the former governor of Illinois is walking around there as we speak tonight.
Is it a USP? Is it a USP?
No. It's a lower security facility.
Oh, you have to be in them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm talking about.
I've done a lot of work with Bernie Madoff, and he's in a sort of a medium and lower security thing too. Now we're coming down to the end of the show. We're going to be following Ross Ulbricht's story until he gets a solution that is a better fit for what he did, and hopefully, not have his life completely wasted. Bob, you've got El Chapo coming next, right, to Supermax?
The Bureau cannot say that, nor will the prosecutors. But when you think about it, what prison in the country would you feel safe, since he's already escaped from prisons and he has other states can take him first, but generally speaking, the other states that have a claim on him are going to give him up to the Bureau of Prisons. He won't be killed. He'll be doing multiple life sentences, and I guarantee you, take this to the bank, he'll be at the Supermax as soon as he's sentenced.
And he better not get out of that room ever. There's a bad guy. Anyway, it's been a fascinating show. FreeRoss.org is Lynn's website. Any donations there are going 100% towards the appeals process. We'll stay close to Lynn. We'll stay close to Bob. It's been Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. Thank you both for a great show. The commercial-free YouTube version, you can search Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell or Park City Productions 06604. We'll see everybody next Monday evening for another edition of Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell.